Just going to hit record so everybody knows we're recording. Okay. Council member Waring. Don't see him on yet. I know Councilman Seeking said he isn't going to be able to make it today. Mr. Batista. Don't see him on yet. Doug Warner.
Here.
Doug. Bob.
Good morning.
Morning. Lawrence Green Jr. Susan Lyons.
Here.
Cashin Drolet.
I'm here. Good morning.
Kevin Mills. I see Kevin is trying to connect, so I will mark him as here. Laura Cantrell.
Here.
Jordy.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Dennis Frazier.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Herbert Maybank. Let's see Herbert here yet. And Mr. Chairman, Haygood Morrison. Okay, all right. I will toss it over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, again, thank you everybody for your time today. I'm sure folks will continue to roll in, and knowing we are in a travel season. And but yeah, I appreciate everybody taking the time today. I think, you know, today will mark, as I mentioned in my email, I think a shift in what we're doing, or namely, you know, as we laid out in the first meeting, starting with, you know, do we want the perimeter wall at a very, very high level? And I think based on, you know, what we've seen so far, I think, you know, we can press forward, you know, from that issue. And second note being, if so, what modifications do we need to make? And so I think that'll be the subject of the ongoing meetings, is to be making specific resolutions, nodes, modifications with regards to the perimeter wall. And so I appreciate everybody taking the time. I think our topics to cover today are the water plan recommendation, which will be our first recommendation, getting that approved and out so that we can get that moving forward. Secondly, the next agenda item was the communications update. I think that's relevant as well. And also, you know, the other update there is that we have the funding and EIS working groups organized as well. And then next, the presentation on the City of Charleston comprehensive plan from the city. And then, you know, finally, you know, get into more detail on the various recommendations, you know, we'd like to cover. So, you know, with that said, you know, we've worked through and redlined a version of the water plan.
Mr. Chairman, this is Laura.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Before we dive into the agenda, could I just build on a comment that you made and share a thought?
Yeah, please.
So Haygood and I have spoken about this, so it's not coming as a surprise to him. And I really appreciated what he said a moment ago about marking a shift in our work, which I think many of us are excited about making that shift. We've been in education mode. We've gotten a lot of good presentations and learned a lot about the state of affairs. And I, for one, am eager to make that shift into working on the assignment of this group, which is to advise the city, the mayor, the council, the staff. And I know that we are going to turn to that at number 5 on our agenda, begin committee discussion on recommendations for the perimeter protection system. And my questions, and the reason I wanted to say this at the top of the meeting, is so perhaps we can all be thinking about it by the time we get to number 5. Look, I'm a process person. I think a lot about process, and I have a lot of questions about how our process is going to function from here on out. I know we have working groups those are important to divide and conquer our work, but I don't understand how the working groups are going to feed into the process. And I don't understand the timeline. For example, I know that there's a draft letter that's going to the Army Corps. That's part of the Corps' process. I don't understand if or when or why not that we're going to see that. It seems like it's part of our assignment. And I understand governmental processes and needs for sensitivity, but we have a charge, an official charge. So it feels like this is part of it. So maybe you all understand the questions that I'm asking and I'm the only one out of the loop. But I feel like in addition to talking about the what of our recommendations, we need to talk about how we're going to work together and be really clear about our process. So that's my request, Mr. Chairman, and I hope we can have more dialogue about that when we get later into the agenda.
Yeah, I think that'll be covered number 5. So you asked a few questions then. One was just, where are we? I think we had to get through, obviously, the education. I think some people are very well educated on specific topics, not on others. I think there were some comments that I've heard throughout the process that show, again, very specific understanding in some areas and not in others. And so getting everybody on the same level of education, I think, is a crucially important thing. Number one. Number 2, I think your second note about going forward, like you pointed out, I think that'll be covered in this number 5 and work together and figure out what resolutions we do want to make and what topics we do want to cover. And we'll post that to the group, of course. And in the third, or really is the second, that was the third point, but the second, the point you made about the letter from the city, I have no clue on that one, so I'll have to kick that to Mark or Kaylin.
Yeah, let me just be clear on it. It's not a letter from the city. It is the city's portion of the report where we would, where we are busy. And I do have an update, Laura, from our phone call yesterday. We are busy gathering right now from city staff. They're the folks that we're gathering input from. When we get the input from the city staff, we're going to compile that together. Kaylin and I had a long talk yesterday with our attorney staff, and we think it's probably wise to, if you can give us some additional time to get all of the input from the staff together, and then be able to share those thoughts with you. There will be plenty of time. I just got off the phone with Army Corps this morning. We'll have time to be able to work on those comments. It's not like they're one and done, but we do want this committee to at least be able to see those, be able to comment on those, but it's not a letter to the Corps with any specific recommendations. It's more our part of the things that we're working on. And I can give you all a very, very, very definitive sneak preview. They look a lot like what you saw in the Wagner and Ball perimeter protection report. They tend to follow the outline very, very closely. So, which is also the outline. If you all would have saw the report that we were ready to submit before we contracted Wagner Ball, those were very similar to the comments that we had put together then, which are also based on the various components that we've been hearing in public comments since we started this. So it's all very consistent all the way back to the beginning. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah, Susan.
I thank you for that. I think that's a great relief to everybody. I do want to echo what Laura said. And I just want to add one thought before we get going. And that is that we've been operating to some degree in our heads according to the Army Corps schedule and deadlines. And I think as this committee goes forward, maybe as we're approaching this, we set our own deadlines and have a really clear idea about what has to happen when on the part of our committees and our working groups. So that's it. But thank you to the two of you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, could I add something to that? That would be based on our phone call from last night. I think I might be able to add some thoughts to that anyway for the committee to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can, we can obviously keep,
Yep.
That's what this whole number 5 is for. So absolutely.
So the July 15th date, that's probably, I apologize, update probably should have never, gotten into this committee's group, because you know what it did? It got everybody focused on a date that really is not as important to this group as it is to myself and Kalen and our workload. But there will be, and I just learned this morning, the Army Corps of Engineers is going to be releasing a draft report, I believe September 10th, for everybody in the community to be able to see. That'll be the first. The EIS will follow that. My recommendation, and I will leave this, and then I think we move on to the agenda and turn it back over to the chairman. I would recommend to the group, I'll recommend to the chairman, that this group, as part of its work, look to have a couple, if not 3 recommendations for the chairman to make to city council during the August city council meeting. Okay, which is probably 4 weeks from next Tuesday, considering next Tuesday is the city council meeting. So I think to the extent that you can drill down on, I believe there's one coming up and possibly a second you could get through today, and then kind of pick on what that 3rd recommendation might be. Doesn't mean that's the end of them. It just means it's an update that he provides to city council on the work of the committee. So I will offer
Mark,
that as a path forward.
when do these recommendations need to be in order to be included on the agenda for the city council meeting?
The week before. Okay. And really what we need to do is the week before, we need to make sure they're on city council agenda. And Kalen and I spoke yesterday. We're going to start working on that next week. And that way we can make sure that they get there. There's a placeholder for us, and then we'll fill in the blanks as you all finish up your work. We don't want to drive the process, but I'm just outlining what I think would be a good set of steps.
And what dates are those meetings? I can look it up
Yeah.
myself, but if you knew offhand.
The next city council meeting is August 17th,
There you go.
following next week.
So we would need to have recommendations in by the 10th in that case, which would mean our next opportunity to discuss that is the 28th of this month. For anything in addition to the water plan.
Yeah, and as long as we have a placeholder for you to speak, you would have actually the 28th and then again on the 11th. Because we don't have to have the recommendations fully outlined for the agenda meeting. You just have to have them prepared when you step to the podium.
Okay, got it.
And if they're not fully prepared, if the committee doesn't come to consensus on the 11th, then we just leave whatever ones you haven't reached consensus on off.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. So next item is the water plan recommendation. Susan submitted a very well worded alternative, basically write-up. Accomplishes the same goal. And speaking with Bob, this morning, I think, it added a word that he mentioned is particularly relevant. I think it's a very good point, which is that we had a unanimous vote by the committee to begin this comprehensive water management plan. So I think that item in and of itself, I think it is an important addition. And again, Susan, it's very well written, and certainly appreciate that testament to you. So wanted to get an official vote. And we do have Kalen, correct me if I'm wrong, we do have a quorum here, I believe, or else we wouldn't be able to call the meeting. Has everybody had an opportunity to read Susan's language? You show by a nod of heads, or just let me know if anybody is not. I guess it's probably better. Okay, good deal. I'd like to formally propose that that Susan's recommendation be submitted to City Council. So I guess I'll put that forward as an official motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. So that said, any discussion amongst the committee with regards to this language or with regards to putting forward the recommendation? With nothing heard, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Any against? All right, so moved. So that's congratulations, everybody. We got our first recommendation in. So certainly appreciate that. That's great work, and thank you again, Susan. It's very well written. I think gets the point across
Thanks.
very well.
I'm glad to help.
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly appreciate that. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which I think is just more of an informational. I think it's a communications update, but I think that can be expanded to the communications working group, the funding working group, and the EIS working group have all been organized, and I know those meetings are getting scheduled. So certainly appreciate Susan, Cashin, and Laura for leading those working groups. Really appreciate y'all and everybody on them as well. Thank you very much. So we'll have, continually have further updates on those fronts as well. But of course, very important topics. And so, next agenda item, moving on, unless anybody has any other comments, questions, or notes there, is to turn it to Mark, Kalen, and Robert Summerfield as well for his presentation with regard to the comp plan.
Yes, and just as a quick precursor to that, I just wanted to add, I've asked Robert to specifically focus strictly on the peninsula and strictly on the concept of a perimeter protection plan. So this would be, again, another piece of education, but I thought it was really important because City Council is considering the comprehensive plan, and within the comprehensive plan, there is a specific discussion about the peninsula and a perimeter protection. And again, this was done by another group of city hired consultants, experts who looked at the peninsula and what its needs were. So I wanted to make sure that you had this before you moved on in any further thoughts about recommendations. So for those of you that haven't met our new planning director, Robert Summerfield is our new planning director, comes to us from Las Vegas. He's jumped right in the middle, and he's been gracious enough to volunteer his time today to go over this for us. And Robert, we'll turn it over to you, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chair Haygood and the rest of the committee. So I'm going to very quickly go through this. If there are time for any questions at the end, I'll be happy to answer those. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. Everyone. Okay, perfect. All right. So just real quickly, I want to make sure everyone is aware, and seeing many of the faces on this call, I know many members of this committee have been very involved in the comp plan update and drafting throughout this process. But just as a reminder, this process began well over a year ago, worked through the COVID period, and we are in what we would consider the final stretch, which is the finalization of the plan and the adoption process. In fact, Planning Commission has recommended this plan to City Council. City Council has workshopped this with the Planning Commission once. They've asked for an additional workshop that'll be happening in early August. But we are very close to the adoption of this plan. So we're very excited about that. As Mark mentioned, I'm going to focus mainly on the peninsula, but this is the comprehensive plan for the entire city of Charleston. And so, it encompasses some foundational findings that are universal throughout the city, but then there are some specific nuances for each area of the city, including the peninsula. On the peninsula, we heard very specifically that there is an interest in kind of, again, preserving that history of the city. Obviously, Charleston grew up on the peninsula and is expanded in more recent decades. But those historic buildings, those scenic views of the harbor are very important, and in particular to the work that you all are doing on your recommendations. We heard a lot about flooding, as one might imagine, on the peninsula, and what can be done to continue to improve drainage and addressing the infrastructure needs. Additionally, we heard quite a bit about not just the drainage infrastructure, but infrastructure from a connectivity standpoint, improving streets so that people can move, and not just in cars, but they can move via transit. They can use our sidewalks to the best of or the fullest ability for all folks of all different levels of mobility. So if you are using assisted mobility devices, if you're fully a pedestrian, if you're a parent with a stroller, and then cyclists as well, as we begin to look more closely at mode shift and providing opportunities for people to access our city in different ways, such as bicycling. Again, maintaining that balance between quality of life for the existing residents and being able to continue to accommodate our tourist-based economy in the downtown area, and then providing additional services. So as we're increasing or kind of bringing back population to the peninsula, which is one of those things that often gets missed, the peninsula used to be contain quite a bit more population than it does now. So as we're looking at strategies that would bring back some of that population, what are we doing with regard to services on the peninsula for things like grocery stores, schools, parking, and then other public facilities? So what we learned, so one of the things for those of you who aren't in the planning world, often planning addresses development, land use, what's inhibition, which you see here. We also typically will address infrastructure, including things like drainage channels, transportation networks, things like that. We'll often take into account in those planning exercises what's listed here is ground, but the different types of soil, where water is and ecology. But what we done very uniquely here that you don't actually see in a lot of planning documents anywhere, but definitely not preceding here, was this intersection of land use and water. So this land water analysis that was done by for the city by Wagner and Ball and the Water Institute of the Gulf, as well as Robinson Design Engineers and Skirklios Design. That is very unique, and that leads to a base understanding in the comp plan that as we move forward into the next 10 years, we need to think very, very carefully about where development is occurring and where it's occurring, not based necessarily on where the existing roadways and where are the existing population centers, taking that into account, but also taking into account where is the water going to be over the course of the next 10 and 20 years? How is that going to affect the ability to develop and continue to develop in the future? And so from that analysis, we got these four kind of distinctions, if you would, on the different characteristics of the land. We start with the high ground, pretty self-explanatory what that means. This is the area with the lowest flood risk. This is the area where you can have good stormwater detention and can have potentially the greatest watershed benefit. The adapt zone is those areas where flooding can occur, but it's infrequent. It's areas where it's not currently within a FEMA flood zone, but it's acknowledged that storm surge, particularly from those higher level storms, is possible and could create damage. In the compound flood risk area, this is the area where between tidal conditions, storm events, and runoff from other areas of the community, these are areas where flooding from all of those different aspects is possible to likely. And then finally, you have the tidal flood risk zone. These are the lowest lying areas. These are the areas that we expect with sea level rise, that we're going to see the marsh migration effect. And so these are areas that even absent a storm, even absent precipitation, as tidal shifts continue to happen, we're going to continue to see flooding in these areas and risk in those zones. This map kind of gives you an overview centered on the peninsula, but you can also see other areas of the community where areas of the city that are currently developed and currently have some development opportunities. Under this scenario, many of those areas are within the designated areas for tidal flood risk and compound flood risk zones. And so we need to have very deliberate and sometimes maybe even hard conversations as we go forward about what the development future in those areas are. As you can see on this map, though, the other thing to keep in mind is on the peninsula itself, we have a fair degree of, and I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, we have a fair spine of either some high ground but adapt zone, but a lot of the peninsula, as you can see, is in this tidal flood or compound flood designation. And so we have to be able to address that as we move forward. And obviously that's a big chunk of what this committee is considering and taking into consideration. So from those zones, the planning strategies that were devised and that have been talked through with the community and worked out are that there are areas where we need to adapt. There are areas where we need to reserve. I think those are important because, again, just because it's high ground doesn't necessarily mean that it automatically means that it's grow. There are going to be areas that we do want to reserve. Those are areas where retention will be important to help preserve the watersheds and downstream effects. There's areas, again, where there is high ground, though, that we do expect to still be able to accommodate growth. There are areas where we can adapt and address some of the impacts of the flooding. And these may be areas where we maybe reduce the development intensity. And so we can adapt to maybe lower intensity development in those areas that can be built in such a way that it's adaptive to the flood risk. And then finally, and I think what may be most important for this conversation and specifically for the peninsula is looking at the defend options. In the peninsula, we have an extremely built up existing area. And so what can we do in this area to address the fact that it's established, it has quite a bit of investment already, and we know we need to defend it essentially. So looking a little deeper into this, the comp plan takes the peninsula looks at it kind of in a singular fashion. While in other areas of the city, we've talked more about adjustments that can be made to the zoning profiles and the development strategies. Because the peninsula is pretty much built up and is looking more at redevelopment versus new or greenfield development, the plan takes the assumption based on all of the research and all of the conversations with the community that the peninsula will be a defend strategy, that there will be some kind of barrier solution, that whether that's a wall, whether that's other elements. In fact, the plan identifies or addresses the fact that there is not one single solution that will provide that barrier protection. And so that's a very important to note. You can kind of see it here in the bottom in red, that it will be a layered approach and it will not necessarily be the same in all areas. And then we include the map here that is part of the work that's been done so far in kind of addressing how might the different PED phases be outlined in a wall type strategy. Want to be clear here, one of the things that the plan does do is it makes recommendations about the future. It uses very objective, and in this case, this plan is very science-based. There's a lot of data that went into the development of this plan. It incorporated and has incorporated input from folks for more than a year's worth of community outreach. So it's developed with quite a bit of input from the community, from folks all across the spectrum of the community. And it's intended to be used for informing daily decisions of staff across all disciplines in the city. So it's not just a planning document for the planners in the planning department. It's for the folks in stormwater, the folks in transportation, public service, and so on. What it does not do on its face, it does not change any zoning. So the adoption of this plan will not affect anyone's existing zoning rights. It does not change any of the stormwater regulations. It does not affect any kind of taxation. And it does not interfere with or supersede any adopted document or plan recommendations that may exist in other plans, unless it very specifically says so. And so it's very important to know that this is one plan document, but there are a lot of other documents that kind of feed into this comprehensive plan, including the plan for fair housing and other things. So very specifically, the new land use map that was developed based on all of this work that was done, it looks with this new water focus and this water lens at reserving the highest intensity land uses for that high ground category, as was already mentioned. It looks at doing the lowest impact, so those areas that are designated for conservation or parks where, you know, you can have a park and when it's raining, no one's using the park. So if it floods, it's not going to be a catastrophe for the community. So reserving those types of activities for that tidal flood risk zone. Again, caveat, the peninsula was kind of taken out of that category because the peninsula is already built out. This is not a greenfield building type of opportunity. And then working to mitigate the flood risk in those areas between the lowest intensity land use categories and that, you know, highest intensity high ground. What can we do in that middle space to scale different solutions for different areas that are appropriate for those mitigation strategies? So this is what the land use map looks like specific to the peninsula. As you can see, it still addresses the fact that there is development all around the peninsula and expected to still be some. We do make some slight modifications to the land use map based on some of that work. Additionally, based on current context and development patterns and what we heard from the community. Again, we are looking to use that high ground or that highest ground, because there's not a lot of high ground as defined, but higher ground. We're also looking to see that highest intensity development along the current proposed low country rapid transit line. We're introducing this neighborhood edge designation in these periphery neighborhoods, again, connecting these residential areas and some of the more multimodal transportation routes, and then looking at the low impact preserve designation and areas where that's appropriate. It's not appropriate necessarily in every area. The city center designation replaces some old designations like urban core, urban center, and neighborhood center, and allows for a wider variety of urban scale development, which I think is important for everybody to know. But specifically on the peninsula, we do make some adjustments and introduce this neighborhood designation that we think is more reflective of the context in certain areas. And you see that as a shift, particularly in the lower part of the peninsula, where under previous plans, it was called urban core, urban center. And now we're designating those as neighborhoods. That doesn't mean that they're purely residential areas. They will maintain some of their civic and commercial aspects, but the scale of those is more neighborhood level versus that higher intensity city center type development you see in other areas. And then finally, the plan, including in the peninsula area, begins to take a really close look at those African-American settlement communities and how are those identified and how do we integrate those communities into future planning, including planning from the work that you all are doing on the flood issues and the wall, because those all have ripple effects into these communities that have previously often not had a voice, not been recognized, and in many cases have been somewhat ignored or left to the side. Some things, I just kind of went through this. So then next steps, want to make sure everybody knows that we are having a public hearing at City Council on July 20th. It will be the first reading for the plan, but it's just that, it's first reading. It's an opportunity for the City Council during the public hearing process to hear from any members of the community that have thoughts or comments on the plan as currently drafted and presented to council. However, the council has requested, and we will be working on it, a second workshop that'll be a joint workshop between the City Council and the Planning Commission. That will happen in early August. Currently, we're looking at the first week in August, we think that will be. And then later, either at the August meeting or the September meeting, depending on the outcome of that workshop, we anticipate that the plan will be eligible for adoption by City Council. Again, depending on how the outcomes of that workshop go. The next thing, once it's adopted, we will immediately begin. In fact, we've actually kind of started this process already to a certain degree, plan implementation. We will be working on timelines and specific implementation strategies for how the recommendations that the council adopts will be rolled out. We will be working with the Parks team on the incorporation of the new master plan for our Parks and Recreation program, as well as the work of the EIRC group, integrating more closely their final report into the plan. Based on their draft, we've worked quite a bit of that in, but we want to make sure that we're clear that that work, when it's done in its final form, will also be integrated in the plan. Additionally, as a matter of record, because the nature of this plan is so very different, I have put forth some budget requests. 2 budget requests I think are important for this group to be aware of. We will be asking to have some resources to be able to do a updated zoning code based on this new comp plan and the strategy. Again, that's very different, and look at a more elevation-based zoning profile for the city. And then for this part, the downtown plan is, more than 20 years old, well more than 20 years old. It contemplated a future for downtown that is nowhere as close to where downtown looks today in a lot of ways. And so one of the things we've also will be requesting in our budget is to do a new downtown plan. That new downtown plan will be done and be very collaborative with any water plan efforts based on the motion that was just made a moment ago or shortly before I began. So it will be a closely tied effort with a new downtown plan and new development strategy specific to the peninsula and downtown, with, again, using water as that kind of central focus in a much more deeper dive than what you can do at the comp plan level. And then finally, this is not meant to be a plan that sits on a shelf that maybe gets taken off the shelf every once in a while. This will be a very dynamic and as mentioned earlier, used daily. So we will be doing, tracking this back. We want to be very transparent to the community. So we will have a website that'll have, continue to use that Charleston City Plan website and provide dashboards so the community can see the progress on implementing the plan. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And then finally, we'll do regular reports to Planning Commission and City Council so that we can publicly make clear the progress of the plan and check in and see if there are areas where something has shifted and we need to address that and make updates to the plan as appropriate. So, Mr. Chairman, Mark, hopefully I did that quick enough so that you all can do your next thing. I do see there are a couple hands up. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you on how you want to handle that.
Thank you very much, Robert. Appreciate the presentation, and welcome to City of Charleston. That's very exciting and great to have you. I see, Bob, you have your hand up. Please fire away.
Well, first off, Robert, very impressive. I mean, great piece of work, which leads to the question. I mean, recognizing that, everybody wants to be in Charleston, there's a real tension that exists with developers and development and sort of the realities of what we're talking about, and that relates to the vulnerabilities of the city. Can you talk some more about what the enforcement mechanisms are? I mean, I heard the plan is a set of recommendations and suggestions, but one scenario, a development proposal, is it possible that a development proposal would be rejected because it doesn't comply with the recommendations or suggestions of this great piece of work? Or what are the enforcement mechanisms? Thanks.
So Bob, that's a great question. And that is, that it will be a struggle. So council will adopt this, well, assuming council adopts this plan, because I can't speak for council, but assuming council adopts this plan, say at one of their September meetings, we will have this period where we will have zoning rights that exist that may propagate development that is contrary to the recommendations of the plan. Those are things that will be an issue where staff may make recommendations for mitigation within those development proposals based on the comp plan, but that will have to be balanced by planning commission and our boards and city council by the fact that there are zoning rights that live, on those properties. So until such time as we can update, to your point about the enforcement component, the way we implement this comprehensive plan is an update to our zoning code. That is the implementation, the primary implementation method for these land use recommendations. That is where the rubber meets the road, if you would, on this. At a certain level, this is still very high level and in somewhat of a thought exercise. The way you make that thought exercise real is in getting to those zoning code updates. But these recommendations can inform the decision-making of our planning commissioners and our other board officers, and they can take that into account when looking at development proposals and any recommended mitigation strategies within those. But they do have to be sensitive to those existing zoning rules and what those zoning rules allow a developer to ask for.
Got it. Thank you. That's excellent. I appreciate it.
Okay, question.
Great question, Bob. And thank you again, Robert, for all the information and material. Dennis, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there. Go.
Just a question. Robert, welcome here. And the Charleston Medical District, which is a group that's worked together a long time, but since around 2015-16 to work on issues of flooding and other things, employs around 25 or so thousand people, has signage that calls it that. I'm just wondering, I may not have seen it, but on some of your graphics, do you also recognize the medical district as one of your areas in your report?
We absolutely do. So the medical area, so if you can see here, let's see if I can. So if you can see here, we actually, so one of the changes that we make in this plan is we identify the medical district as a campus. That's the way it's sort of envisioned, as a connected campus where you can achieve various medical needs throughout that space. And so the plan actually upgrades this area to this campus designation, which ascribes it some different specific recommendations for achieving the goals of the medical district. Additionally, that'll be one of those things that will be a focus area in a new downtown plan, is the connectivity of the medical district to the other services, both employment and service elements of downtown. It maintains a specific focus area for the city, particularly with the connectivity to the Low Country Rapid Transit, which will, kind of do its circle back, if you would, right there at the medical district, and some other work that we're doing that's very specific to the medical program in that area.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank y'all very much. Any additional questions for Robert as it relates to his report? Not seeing any other questions, Robert. I greatly appreciate it and look forward to continuing to see as it progresses, and also thank you for taking the time to give the report to our committee and the inclusion of water management and the barrier system in your report and analysis. So thank you very much.
No problem. If anyone does need to reach out to me, my information's online, and I'll be happy to connect with anybody if they have any additional questions.
Yeah, and to put in a plug for it, charlestoncityplan.com. I don't know if y'all saw it on the presentation, but has a ton of great data and information regarding process and content. So moving on to our last item, which is starting committee discussion on recommendations for the perimeter protection system. So, thought here is, again, getting out of moving past the kind of education to get everybody on the same page as far as informational, and getting into going into specific recommendations. A few that have been brought up in the past, just to begin the discussion, regarding specific alignment. So where would we want specific alignment of the perimeter wall? Another example is, visual impact and mitigation. And so how could the wall visually impact the city, and how could we mitigate that? Historic and cultural mitigation, obviously a very relevant and important topic here. Amenities, recreation is another one, and then natural and nature-based solutions is another topic I'd like to cover. Are there any other topics, and this is meant to be an open discussion, in addition to ones I've mentioned, or any specifics on the ones I've mentioned that any committee members would like to go through?
I'd like to add one to the list. I don't think you captured it, but you can correct me if I missed it. And again, I'm going to make a plug for having process be part of this conversation. So you've already heard me on that. But I would also like to discuss advancing a community-led resilience planning process for the Rosemount community that can happen now, that can start in parallel to whatever the perimeter protection plan turns out to be. Finding the funding for it, getting the community organized and engaged in a planning process.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I had a really long conversation with Herbert yesterday. We spoke for about an hour. And so, Mark and I are going to go, and actually, I appreciate you bringing that up. I was hoping Herbert would be on today, as it specifically relates to Rosemont, but we're circling the 23rd to go on a walking tour with Herbert, and hopefully the Corps can make it. And if anybody here can make it, it's still getting pinned down on specifics, but circling the 23rd. But thank you, Laura. I really appreciate you bringing that up.
And if I can be a resource and helpful in any way, or part of helping with logistics on that, I'm happy to do so.
Well, I think it falls, and that was, I think you maybe saw my email with regard to the EIS working group last night. That was why I looped Herbert into that email chain, as it specifically relates to that working group. So I think, it was based on that conversation, and so that I had with them. So I think if you can make it on the 23rd, I think it'd be helpful, and we can even call it a working group session, in addition to a general walkthrough.
Okay, that's helpful clarity. When I saw that email with him looped in, I thought you were doing that because he's a member of that committee. So I was really confused about the reason. Kaylin, maybe you and I should connect just to make sure I'm clear on these kind of details.
Sure.
And EIS working group, we're trying to schedule. So if you are available on the 23rd, we'll try to suss out if that's an outing that we can all make together.
Yeah, and obviously that happened, a conversation happened at like 5:30 last night. And so it's not a ton of time, but happy we're talking through it. I think, I mean, we can do a separate meeting on that. We could probably include that, well, again, with the help of the working group, in the alignment category. Laura, does that make sense? Or does that make sense from y'all's perspective?
I mean, it's related to alignment, but it's also different. I mean, it's a completely different parallel process for, just like in the presentation from Sherwood Design Engineers about how to get the community engaged and start a resilience planning process that is focused on non-structural measures. So I don't know that I don't know that I would tuck it under alignment, but it's related.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Sorry, I'm taking quick notes here. Okay. Well, I'll just add another note for Rosemont specifically. Hey, Bob, I see your hand up as well. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Hagan. And Laura, your opening comments, spot on. You expressed a lot of the thoughts I had, and you did it in a much more civil manner than I think I could have. So thanks for that. That was very well expressed. And this is maybe a little bit provocative, but it sort of knits together a couple of thrusts from prior discussions. We've got a lot riding on this 3x3. If it doesn't work, we're screwed. I mean, we'll be increasingly vulnerable from a delay, dollars, damage perspective. So this notion of us taking a sober look at, these are all good recommendations and proposals, but does this thing have legs? And to that point, this notion of, do we have the votes? So if we're going to be advocates of this project, or at least facilitate advocacy, we have to ask that question. What's the governance for this? And do we have the votes? The public, our congressional leadership, the council, the Army Corps of Engineers, Congress. I mean, we need a campaign manager if we're going to take this seriously and not be made more vulnerable as opposed to less vulnerable by attaching our cart to this horse. Because if the horse comes up lame, we're screwed. So a long prologue, but I think this group, to be substantive, needs to recognize that political reality and start thinking very soberly, very thoroughly about how we enlist the governance on this thing. Because right now, I mean, I've had a conversation with Mike Seekings, and I don't want to speak for him, but there's real doubt about whether there are votes available to push this past the first gate. If we want our product to be substantive and relevant and persuasive and influential, I think we have to talk about the risk assessment of the project and do we have the votes? If we don't have the votes, what's the process? What's the plan to get the votes? Thanks.
Bob, what would you suggest, and what are your thoughts on a forum through which to talk through that?
Well, I think it probably falls under the purview of the communications group, but with a much more precise definition and remit to what one of the deliverables needs to be. And, weak minds like my own would suggest, hey, do we need a referendum to gauge how much are we behind the 8 ball? Or do we need some metrics to understand the viability of this? And if there's a gap in terms of endorsement and awareness leading to endorsement, we need to identify that delta, like toot sweet, for us to help address it. Because otherwise, we may put in a lot of good work and it's, DOA, because we don't have the votes. That's the pragmatic reality. We may not have the votes.
Sure, understood. I mean, I guess informationally there, we just obviously needs to go through the city council. But to your point, there's a number of layers there for funding that would be required, which some are information based and I think some are vote based. Trying to think through process here.
Apologize for interrupting, but one degree of frustration is this will be the 4th request for the Army Corps of Engineers to give us the return on investment for the other competing cities' proposals. 4th request. And just as an element to us gauging, where do we stand? What is where do we stand?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Mark, do you have any thoughts there or comments or?
I'm going to yield to Councilmember Waring, and then I'll come back and answer any questions beyond what he provides.
Well, thanks, Mark, and hello, everybody. Bob is right. As a matter of fact, Bob, I appreciate you bringing that to bear, because when you look at the large infrastructure projects that have been accomplished in the Low Country, it's been a broad reach. And if you say, what are you talking about? I can remember, I go back more than 15 years, 20 years ago, we had 77 schools in Charleston County, and probably 76 of them were dilapidated. And we had a no new tax crowd, and we had to build a momentum to replace the infrastructure. I would say over the last 15 years, we've probably spent somewhere around $1.3, $1.4 billion replacing our physical plant when it came to schools. And if you don't believe it, just ride by your neighborhood school and take a look at it. But that built a momentum. It was a regional approach to that. And when I mean regional, you had not only the city of Charleston, you had city of North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, the county, all kind of pushing in the same direction. And you say, well, okay, that's schools and kids, that's different. When it came to replacing the what we now know is the Ravenel Bridge, but it's the Cooper River Bridge. It was a $600 million project. And the effort was, if we put it on property taxes, only a portion of the population would bear the brunt of something virtually everybody would use. That's where the half-cent sales tax momentum came. Again, a regional approach. The first half-cent sales tax was $1.2 billion. And we've seen, and I don't think we actually had in either cases, between the two, have we seen any bad news as cost overruns and bridges being built to nowhere, roads to nowhere? All those improvements came in. And again, a funding formula was put in place. In Sunday's paper, they had a big thing about mass transit or rapid bus transit system. That came with the second half-cent sales tax referendum, which will accumulate $2.4 billion for transportation in this area. I think some green space dollars. Bob, what you're talking about needs to be applied, in my opinion, to the city of Charleston's need. And somehow, and I don't mind, this isn't top secret what I'm saying right here. We have to get away from doing things that help us in our campaigns to putting a strategy in place that's best for drainage, flooding for this region. And when I mean this region, part of the divergence that's creating politically is so much focus on the peninsula. And believe me, I understand the need for the peninsula. I do. But if you're going to raise a match of about $600 million, we need to have an approach that brings in solutions not only for the peninsula, but west of the peninsula. When I mean west of the peninsula, I mean West Ashley, James Island, and Johns Island. Okay, now if we're not going to go for a drainage solution or a funding formula that's going to help the peninsula, West Ashley, James Island, and Johns Island, then I think you're going to have a problem. I think we're going to go through a lot of good effort here, and you're not going to come up with the money to be able to do it, come up with the match. And you say, our budget right now, the city's budget is about a $20 million or so budget. We're talking in excess of 600 million being the match without one change order. And I would doubt that any of that's going to be done without a change order. So I believe the momentum is there. You know, after the Dutch dialogues, if it's one thing that rolled out there, it was very inclusive, it was very well done. Mark and his team did a great job bringing professionalism to a topic that normally the squeaky wheel gets the oil. In other words, the community that we have limited resources, so the community that cries out the largest tends to get the fixes in their community. And we tried that in the school district. We would put one community against the other, Mount Pleasant against the peninsula, or the peninsula against West Ashley. It wasn't until we went out and got a broad funding formula in place against, again, I'm repeating, but the school bond referendums coming through, that we got money that fixed up schools, North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, West Ashley, James Island, Johns Island, etc. And if you say, well, where's the city approach to that? We don't have it. So when this report comes forth to planning, zoning, and eventually bubbles up to city council, there are 13 of us, including the mayor, that has to vote on this. And the answer is going to be, well, where's the money? And right now we have not, we meaning the mayor and the 12 council people, which I'm one, we have not, I chair the Public Works Committee. We have not had one 5-minute conversation as a group on how we're going to fund this.
Right.
And that's wrong for this committee to get, and that's why you haven't seen, I think I've missed one meeting. I came on late this morning because I had a follow-up doctor's appointment. But you all are doing great work. And I'm not saying that to patronize, great work on behalf of the city, and I think this region, because many of the answers coming up here will help. I don't know whether the town of Mount Pleasant is poking over our shoulders, but I hope they are, especially in the Old Town area. But with that said, unless we get to working on a funding formula, we're going to have that same parochial differences where you're going to have West Ashley saying, what are you doing for us? And the answer is nothing. And then all the money goes down to the peninsula all over again. And I got to tell you, that does not work. All that means is you get a bunch of allies in a circle. We pull out guns and start shooting. All we do is shoot one another. So where's the answer going to come from to fund this? I think that needs to be, you all are doing the work and coming up with great presentations. But in the past, and I think Mike, he's not on, I don't think he's on the call today. Mike Seekins has said, we got a bunch of reports that's been studied that's sitting on the shelf, catching dust. He's right. We know some of the things for Calhoun West, which is a major drainage project that heretofore we don't have $5 to my knowledge to put towards it. And the shame of it all is right now we're coming into our infrastructure bill with that Congress, I believe one way or the other is going to come through and pass something. Now, do we have our plan to say,
No.
thank goodness, here's our plan that we can put forth to Washington, and ask Congressman Clyburn and ask Senator Scott and Congress Lady Nancy Mace and our team to go and fight. Because one thing about when it comes to infrastructure in a region, political differences on the local area tends to be put aside. And if you say, well, where's your proof on that? I'll go back to the Ravenel Bridge. I think the only person in our congressional and Senate delegation that voted against that, and he's a friend of mine, was Mark Sanford. Everybody else voted for it in Washington. And, you know, we got the 75% dollars on that. And again, half-cent sales tax came through with the match. So my point is, I appreciate the time that you've given me, but we have a funding formula and a methodology that has brought the city and the region together. Okay, we are not engaging that, and I say shame on that, and shame on me, shame on the political people that you have elected to put in a position on that, because this isn't something, and you're getting ready to see something right now that's my knowledge is supposed to be on the agenda on the next meeting. Well, I don't get my package until tomorrow. But if it is, I saw at the committee meeting yesterday on recreation, we're asking for 117 million for parks and recreation and update and all of that. And I got to be frank. I said to myself, my goodness, we've done through what, 2 years of the Dutch dialogue. We've gone through this effort with the 3x3 and the $100+ million referendum that we're coming up with right now is for parks and recreation. So, well, how much of it is for drainage and implement this 3x3 fix? And don't get me wrong, I love parks. And I'm an outdoor person. My wife and I had breakfast this morning, 7:30, on our back porch, so we can listen to the crickets and the birds and all of that kind of stuff. I love that. Okay, I love eating outside much more than eating inside. So when COVID came along and outside dining became more popular, it just, hey, I was a fan already. That said, I would have thought the first, when we get into the $100 million request, would have been for some sort of drain. See, in my mind, the priority is drainage, affordable housing, and everything flows down from there. And something is leapfrogging this effort right here. It's a bad idea, in my opinion, to come up with. And I know, believe me, I know recreation is very, very popular. But if we're going to raise taxes, see, when we asked people, what would you like? And they came up with this list of things, and everybody said, yeah, we like these parks, and we want this, and we want that. Nobody said how you're going to pay for it. And the only way we can pay for that is raise taxes. And if we're going to raise taxes for recreation, that's less money for drainage. It really is, because we're going to the same pockets to get those dollars. I think the momentum, this should not be sitting on the shelf afterwards. All this work that's being done, all the professionalism, and I certainly wish Mark well, but I got to tell you, we're going to miss him. He brought professionalism to a topic that was in the closet prior to him coming on board with the city. So when he speaks, it's like E.F. Hutton. Only young people won't remember that, but E.F. Hutton used to be a commercial where when E.F. Hutton spoke, everybody froze right in place and everybody would listen. But that said, Bob, I can't tell you, you didn't almost hit the bullseye. You have hit the bullseye. And I would say today, this is just one person speaking, I would be happy to be wrong on this. If you don't have a funding formula in place, you're not going to get the money to do it. We had a surplus in the state when they voted for the state budget last month. The city of Charleston didn't ask for $5 of that surplus. The city of Sumter, South Carolina, got 15 million. Columbia, I'll get a copy of that, and I should share that with you. Right now, out of the American Recovery Act, there's $2.5 billion in Columbia right now, and between August and September, they're going to divvy that money up. They're going to divide that money up. The governor has said it's a one-time opportunity, and it could basically be a game changer for the state of South Carolina. You mean to tell me this 3+3 project isn't deserving of getting some of that $2.5 billion that's unallocated right now? Do we have a request in for that? The answer is unequivocally no. And that's shame on us. Can I put that request in as one council member? I cannot. Okay. I brought that up, I think the last meeting or whatever. And I was told that we have lobbyists, but you shouldn't wait on the lobbyists to come to say to you to say what to lobby for. It should be us going to the lobbyists saying, these are the projects that we would like to get funding out of this bucket of money. Go get it. Put the go in Columbia and shake hands and go to lunch and talk to the friends and talk to the Senator Leatherman and Speaker Lucas, Speaker of the House and the Chairman of Ways and Means. Speak to those people, get our requests in front for consideration. But, I've never won the lottery, and I'm not going to win the lottery. I've never played the lottery. But we're not going to get any of that $2.5 billion right now in Columbia if we certainly don't have a palatable proposal. And if this isn't one, I'd like to know what it is. So, again, I took more than my time, but these seeds that I've thrown out there, we as a mayor and council need to slam on brakes and quit doing things that work well in a campaign, because after you get elected, it's time to govern, and this is a huge governance issue right here. This drainage and stormwater issues. In the paper this morning, Mount Pleasant is increasing their stormwater fee by about 50%. It's a gradual increase. They put theirs on the property tax bill. We do not. We leave our collection up to CPW. It's been over a year. I mean, we probably have close to $1 million to not quite $2 million, about $1.4, $1.5 million in late fees. And late fees on stormwater collection. Now, that's not fair to all of us who pay our stormwater fee, because the people who don't pay theirs, they still want us to go out there and clean out the drains and keep the pipes working and flowing in the direction away from their property. North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, I'm sure there are other municipalities, they place their stormwater fee on the property tax bill. So when you pay your property taxes, they get that money all up front. In our case, we get 1/12 per month as we progress through the year. And when people don't pay it, we have no mechanism right now of going to collect that. Well, I got to tell you, with the sea level rising to where it is, we cannot be discombobulated when it comes to the fees that we collect to implement the fixes, to pay for the drainage solutions that go in place. So I guess I appeal to this committee, because this committee has influence. If it's one thing on the other side of this meeting, Bob and everybody on this call, please beg us to get a funding formula in place, get a strategy in place, get a request in out of that 2.5 billion in Columbia that's going to be divided up. Get a plan in place such that if the infrastructure bill is passed in Washington, we're going to be right there, not going to get our strategy in place. We should be talking about those strategies with our Washington representatives now. So this goes far beyond the 12 and 13 people on council, because the city of Charleston alone doesn't have the capability. The taxpayers in the city of Charleston alone doesn't have the capability of coming up with the money to fix this. It has to be a coordinated effort. So I wish that our effort to put the funding formula in place was as coordinated in a way such that this committee is y'all doing, I should say I'm on the committee, but I try not to interrupt because I love hearing the different input here, but we need a funding formula and we need your help. So thanks a lot. Mark, I took some of your time and everybody else's, but I appreciate the time y'all have allowed.
Councilmember, no, thank you for saying that. And I know there's a number of questions, so I didn't mean to jump in, but I mean, I noticed, and Bob, this is make a note for you as well. I mean, I would love to have you on the funding working group, you know, and Bob, you know, I noticed you were on the communications working group, would love to have you on that. You know, this is stuff where, you know, we get in these meetings and it's, you know, it's great to talk about, but I think everybody's made this point so far. We've brought up a lot of questions, and I think it's all part of the education process and something that we've had to get through, right? And make sure we're all informed, understand everything. We have so many individual skill sets that now that we're kind of shifting out of this education and into production and content, you know, we need councilmember folks like you, Bob, folks like you that have these you know, deep backgrounds and skill sets and this information. I mean, that's why this, and folks like everybody on the committee. I mean, that's why this committee is formed in the first place, and the reason everybody is on here is because of your individual skill set. So, you know, questions are great and something that we had to get through. And now I think we're all at a knowledge base where we can press forward with action. And so, so I'd encourage both of y'all to join those working groups that you feel strongly about, and that goes for everybody on the committee. I hope to see y'all, Bob. I hope to see you on the communications working group, and Councilmember Waring, I would love to see you on the funding working group as well, because you have a better, candidly, a better knowledge and skill set on that front than with regard to public finance, specifically regarding the city, than I think anybody on the committee. So I think we have these wonderful skill sets. You know, let's use them. I wish Lawrence Green was on as well. You know, he has a background in grant writing that I think also would be great to bear. So I'll give him a call as well and mention that to him. But I think, you know, action is important, and you know, it's great to ask these questions, and I think we can form an action plan to help implement the answers. But sorry, I wanted to jump in real quick and make that point. I know there's a number of different comments and questions, but Councilmember Waring, really appreciate all the input and information. It's hugely helpful. And Bob, as always, certainly appreciate the thoughts and input and efforts on every front as well. But with that said, I'll get back to Mark. Go for it. Let's see your hand up.
So I knew Councilmember Waring would add a lot of wisdom to the discussion, so I am so glad that I deferred because it was there. Let me just say a couple of things. I want to go back to the way Laura opened this, and that's about process. All of what was just said is absolutely spot on in terms of you know, financing. I will say from a process standpoint, one of the things that we staff have been facing with this project all along is we need to get a endorsed product. And to date, there has been a lot of conversation around the city about whether this is the right product or not. So we started with, you know, do you need this? So remember the first meeting we said, does the city need a perimeter protection plan? Does it need some type of perimeter protection? So we've tried to bring the experts in so that you all can make your decision on that. The second thing is this plan that the Army Corps is putting forth, is this a plan that you all can support? And if so, then that, I would argue, if that goes to City Council, now City Council understands that this group has looked at this and said, this is something we could support. The draft plan will be released on September 10th. I think what you all should be hopeful for, I am hopeful that you will see that the cost has come down. I will then say to you, you know, the plan itself is not finalized until next year in like July of 2022, August of 2022. But we'll pretty much know what the plan looks like later this summer. I would suggest that that is the appropriate time to begin to do all of the things that Councilmember Waring just said, because when we do visit other organizations throughout the region, the question always comes up, is this supported by your council? Is this supported by your citizens? I'm hearing that there are many concerns about this plan. Once we can get behind this plan, that we can take something to put in front of people and say, this is something we are supporting, now we can really begin to have the conversations about supporting it. Let me just offer one example, and this is something that I think we should be proud of in Charleston. Yesterday, we had a call, and I know Cashin isn't here, on the Section 106, which is preserving the historic district of Charleston. There was, I can't remember the number of people on, but just about every federal agency that you could think of. The state was on, as well as a number of advocacy groups. There were 134 edits, 134 comments to the programmatic agreement, which defines that process. The woman who runs it for the Army Corps of Engineers says she's never seen as many comments on any programmatic agreement. These are pretty much standard forms. They accepted almost all of them into the programmatic agreement, and that will be coming out for, they'll be putting that out for public review very quickly here, so everybody gets to see it with the edits. My point in saying all that is, there is a lot of community engagement going on in a lot of different ways. The sooner this group can get to a point where they can answer those questions, do we need one? Is this a plan that we can make work? If not, these are the things we think. We can begin to really begin to advocate strongly for this plan from a money side. It's hard to, I would think, for even for staff to go to city council without having a strong support from a community group like this to say this is something that the advocacy group has supported. So that's the reason I teed it up that way, because I know this is going to be a multi-year effort to find the funding to support this. But anyway, if it adds to the process discussion, I think that's kind of the process discussion that we should or try to work through, offer to this group. So anyway, I'll shut up on that. Thank you, Council Member Waring. I appreciate those words, and I'll turn it back over to the chairman.
No, thank you very much. I saw Bob and Susan had their hands up as well. Who wants to start?
Oh, hi. Thank you, Councilman Waring. Your thoughts have been my thoughts for like 3 years. And I'm on the communications committee, and I would like to ask if those members would please hurry and get back to me so we can first set up a meeting. But I wanted to say that we probably need a subcommittee that addresses both the political issues and the funding issues. And I just want to put it out there that my sense was that the private community in Charleston needs to be engaged insofar as funding goes. And I don't ever hear that talked about. I know that there are government resources. I know that everybody's going to be competing for them in one form or another at every level. But my sense too is that, and has been all along, that Charleston needs to take care of Charleston, as well as reaching out regionally. And I agree that we don't have a strategy for that as a city. And I think that this is not only a critical time and a need to do it, but also an opportunity to become the center of a regional effort. But we've got to have private voices, we've got to have corporate voices, and we have to have government voices all contributing to this. And we need a communications plan to go side by side with that, because the public has to pay for this in the long run. So thank you, Mr. Waring. You put a frame around this, and I think I'm not on the financial committee. I'm not a financial person, but my sense is that we need a specialty group of people in finance who know a heck of a lot more than probably most of us on how to get money together and fund billions of dollars that this community, along with all the other coastal communities in the country, are going to need to protect itself. Charleston has to take care of Charleston. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Greatly appreciate it. And well, I mean, if Councilman Waring, we're willing to join, and between him and Bob and the rest of Dan, the rest of the folks on that, and Jordy and the rest of the folks on that working group, rather, we have a lot of very sharp people on there. So that's good news. Bob, I saw your hand up earlier.
Just a quick one, maybe to accelerate our process. Could each member draft a resolution, draft a recommendation or a proposal, and then we can react to something as opposed to starting with a, white sheet of paper? And we've sort of talked around a number of things that we all feel are important. I wonder if that might be a process to sort of get to end a job, and then submit those recommendations when they're available, and just somehow accelerate this process, because it's a daunting task. Just as an idea.
That's a great idea. I think it makes all the sense in the world, and like you said, it gets the ball rolling. A good way to start. Like I think you put it well, as opposed to starting from a white sheet of paper. I think it's a great idea. Flores,
could I build
go
on
for
that?
it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe building out on that suggestion, or perhaps a friendly amendment to it. Perhaps a function of the working groups could be to gather those recommendations as a working group and bring those forward in the reporting out. I'm just, again, I know I'm a broken record about process, but one of you mentioned, maybe it was Mark, maybe it was Haygood, mentioned developing an action plan. And there are different ways of defining an action plan. I'm not sure which definition you were thinking of when you said that, but what I'm thinking of is like, what are the terms of engagement for this committee to actually do the work? And we are all feeling a sense of urgency, and we want to accelerate our work. But if we're like random about it, then that's just going to bog us down. So I had been thinking, again, Kaylin, I'm looking at you. Maybe a good next step following this, and I know we're out of time, would be for the people who are chairing these working groups to meet with you and like map out process so that we've got a clear way and coordinated and consistent way that these groups are going to function. That could include doing what Bob said.
Good.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, the other thing that we kind of blew past this is also going through topics, and it's something that we didn't necessarily get to started to work through, and got important, brought up a lot of important points. But I'll actually, Susan, you were going to build on that comment. Go for it.
Oh no, I was just juggling my machine because it's not holding the signal. I agree with Laura. Let's
okay.
do it.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, I love it.
I'm just jiggling.
Are there any other topics?
Hagen, let me say one
okay.
thing. Let me say one thing, Hagen. I think
Yes,
you have more influence than you think you have. I actually think to piggyback on Bob's comment about accelerating. We got city council meeting on whenever the next city council meeting. You ought to present as chairperson of this committee and ask for requests to be put in for financial strategy. We've got 60 days. The day is what, the 14th of July. Somewhere around the first week and the second week of September, they're going to be dividing up that 2.5 billion in Columbia. So if we don't accelerate, getting back to Bob's point, how are we going to get a request? When I say we, the city of Charleston, going to get a request for how many dollars to do what when it comes to the 3x3 process? and to do what Mark suggested. In other words, the controversies on the wall versus the controversies out there. We have to have something to fund. We have to have something to request funding for. And that has to be put together by the mayor and his team, voted on by council, and then shifted up and hopefully our lobbyists get to working sooner rather than later on those dollars. In 60 days, that turf is going to be divided. That means we would have missed out on that opportunity as a city. So as chairman of this committee, you will be heard. It's not going to be another little report coming before city council. These stakeholder committees that have been put together, I'm not saying this to flatter you, it carries weight with the mayor and council. So I think we've been doing a lot of meetings, but some of it, I can say this, but it'd be much better for consensus of this committee to come forward and then to be supported by myself and Councilmember Seekings, and it kind of grows like that, kind of like dominoes. Okay, that was a purpose for us to be on this committee, not to dominate the committee, but when good ideas come forth, you don't have to support it by yourself. So I think somehow with getting from that clean sheet of paper between now and whenever we meet the third Tuesday in this month, I think is next. I think Tuesday is the meeting. Somehow, Mr. Chairman, you can have a soundbite to come forward to maybe jumpstart some action, at least asking for some of the money out of Columbia, so people won't say. Literally, I spoke to 2 senators 2 weeks ago about another issue, that funding, and they were actually laughing at us. One was out of Florence and one was out of Columbia. And they told me that Charleston is missing in action. What's happening to you guys? So let's get some action going, please. Anyway, so that's one.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Councilman Waring.
I'm finished. Yeah, I'm finished. Man.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely would obviously more than happy to do that. I mean, with regards to that specific ask, we obviously have this water plan recommendation as it relates to funding. I mean, what are your thoughts there on how I would structure that conversation and have it?
I think
I
think the water plan conversation, just from a soundbite standpoint, is one people can grab onto a lot easier. When I mean people in Columbia, people in Greenville, Columbia's had their flood, I don't know so much about Greenville having a flood, but from Myrtle Beach all the way down to Hilton Head, you got to think about who you're talking to in Columbia. And you build allies by people who share in the same problems that we share in. So at the end of the day, in the Senate, you got to get 24 votes. There are 46 senators, so you got to get 24 of them on your team, and there are 124 people in the South in the House, and you got to get a majority of those. So I think the water plan right now will probably, and Mark, I ask your opinion on that as well. The wall idea, I don't know if a person in Greenville can grab onto that right now, but I think the water plan idea, I think you find a lot of allies up there. Now, I wish we had people that could grab onto both ideas up there. But, you asked my thoughts. That's what I thought. I thought that one would be a little easier one to lobby.
We can definitely do that. I mean, go and give an update, go through the specifics on the water plan recommendation, how it was unanimous, the urgency of it, prioritization there. And so point is that, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea, and I'll do that.
Good.
Get on the whatever we have to do, Mark, Galen.
Great.
Again, I'm going to go. I know I sound like a broken record, but I think What precedes even a water plan is, does the question to council, based on everything that you all have seen, this independent group, do you believe that you need a perimeter protection system? That starts it. Then a water plan precedes, the Army Corps plan. Can the Army Corps plan work? I think that makes it easier for council to digest where this particular group is headed. And it begins to, I would argue it begins to help them understand the work that they'll be doing over the next year or two in terms of trying to work on funding for this.
So right now, right this moment, why don't we make a vote on whether we want to state that, yes, this group unanimously or whatever believes that a perimeter protection plan is essential? And let's put that to bed. There's no need to discuss that for the next 6 weeks. If there's any disagreement with that, let's voice it, but let that be the first draft that we can all either agree or disagree on.
Mr. Chairman, I would, 'cause we did lose a quorum here, so I think for a vote today, it's not on the table, but if going back to process, I would recommend, Mr. Chairman, you do something similar with you did with the water language and have a language proposal, to Bob's point earlier, on a piece of paper that people can look at ahead of next meeting, and you could bring that up as the first order of business to do a vote on that motion. We
Just do it as a written unanimous consent.
There you go.
Circulate it as a unanimous written consent. If there's any disagreement, it wouldn't carry. But people do that all of the time.
Yep, we unfortunately
Kim,
just
does that
don't
work
have
from a
quorum
process
to do it.
standpoint? Kayla and Mark, can we hold virtual votes on different things? Is that like an email consent work for a vote, or no?
I have to check, because I know, I know some internal city committees have been able to do that in COVID, but I'm not sure on our public meetings. So I think that's something, Mark, that we could check with legal.
Yeah, we're pretty engaged with our lawyers on this, folks. We try to stay straight and narrow on everything that we do. So we'll get back to you on that, but we'll try to make it work.
Let's break some glass. I mean, let's have someone say no. Let's be problem solvers, have people stop us, but let's be proactive on some of this stuff.
Well, why don't I give a suggestion?
Bob,
Why don't you have a circulate the question, and then you have a call meeting instead of wait until the next meeting. I mean, you can
do that.
You can circulate that. I mean, Kaylin is right about the people dropping off the call, but why don't you circulate that question today that Bob has put before us, and maybe have a call meeting just on that one question or that one vote Friday or Monday. And get that up or down vote. I think that's important.
By call meeting, you mean just set a? I'm sorry, Councilman Waring.
I was thinking, don't wait till the next meeting, because depending on that vote, it may affect what you have to say Tuesday.
Right.
If you're going to have a word.
We've got two meetings of this group before Haygood. We're going to ask you to speak at City Council. Just like we said at the beginning, we want to try to get like 3 recommendations minimum before council on the 17th of August.
So when's the committee meet again?
This one meets in 2 weeks. So
2 weeks from today.
2 more meetings for this one before we get to the next city council meeting in August.
I'm just, maybe I'm fixated on that 2.5 billion, but that'll throw us a month. So 2 weeks from now, that puts us the end of July. The following meeting puts us in the middle of August before we get that. Remember in September, as I told you, in Columbia, they're going to be getting together. In the meantime, you can't wait till August 20th for your lobbyists to start asking for funding. They really need to get going to work this month. Anyway, that's just some of the things out there.
Can we start to put
Well, let's pose the call meeting.
together a statement so that it's ready whenever?
Susan, you're in and out, but I think what you said was, can we start putting together a statement to go ahead and put forward to everybody? And you know, I'm with you. I mean, I think, Bob, I'll if you could please, you know, shoot me. I know you did this on the water plan recommendation as well. Please shoot me kind of, or everybody, not, you know, not just Bob, Susan, Bob, you know, Councilmember Waring, I mean, Doug, Laura, everybody on the call. You know, please send thoughts on language, and we'll get that distributed out and post this call meeting concept to have an ad hoc meeting.
Hey, good. If you recall, there were 2 resolutions drafted 6 weeks ago. And the second was that the group believes that we need a perimeter protection plan. That was drafted 6 weeks ago. So I'm sure, you know, we would benefit from having that refined with additional pretty words, but if we all agree, let's get it submitted.
We'll download offline. I don't remember what the resolution looked like that was drafted, so I could have just missed it. So I'll give you a call after this. We'll track it down.
Councilmember, I sent you a chat. If you could just take a look at that. I've got a couple of things in terms of next couple of weeks for council members I wanted to run by you. I just need a good phone number to call you.
Okay, listen, my office is 843-763-5388.
Okay.
I'm sitting here right now, and then my cell is on 843-817-8907.
Okay, thank you.
Good deal.
All right, we'll get those. We'll get those 2, and I'll even maybe help draft a third recommendation for the council to the committee to consider. And I think at least what I'm hearing in terms of process is we're striving towards the 17th to have some real stuff. And if in between, Kaylin and I can come back, just as a matter, we did meet with the lobbyists last week, but I have not gotten back to see where all that ended. So I don't want to say anything without having definitive answers on that, but I'll get that information for everybody.
Are we going to have a working group meeting with Haygood? Is that the next thing?
Yeah, I
Susan-
just got to get everybody,
Working group chairman?
everybody on the right.
Susan, per
Yes, yeah.
Laura's
I think
suggestion, I'll reach out to you, Cash, and Laura, and get Haygood on the call, and maybe we can do a quick call of process direction forward on the working groups, if that works.
Okay. Thank you. Or we could meet in person, maybe?
Yes, depending on people's schedules. Yeah,
And
I'll
back
shoot
to
an
me.
email out today.
Great, thank you.
Well, I really appreciate y'all's time. I know we're way over. Well, thank y'all very much. So everybody be on the lookout for additional communications and with regards to the working group. And Bob, I'll give you a call right after you get off the line. Thank y'all. Have a great day.
What?